Good day, everyone, and good day, Ma'am Lalot. My name is Christian Ocampo Bustamante, and today I will be discussing the fallacies of presumption. And those include begging the question, complex question, false dic- false dichotomy, and also suppressed evidence. But I will only be discussing the first three because those are my assigned roles for this. But now let us begin with begging the question. So, what is begging the question actually, and why is it part of the fallacies of presumption? So, these fallacies of presumption arise not because of the premises are irrelevant to the conclusion or provide insufficient reason for believing the conclusion, but because the premises presumes what they propose to prove. So, it just basically means that they're trying to prove that it's true, but it actually doesn't have a point to where they're going at. And that's where we begin begging the question. And it begging the question is it presumes that the premises provides adequate support for the conclusion when in fact it does not, actually does not. And also it only happens when the arguer creates illusions that inadequate premises provides adequate support for the conclusion only. Also, the other name for The other name for begging the question is Pepitio Principe, which is in Latin, of course. So it is otherwise called as request for the source. This is why it this is why because it begs the question because the source of support to conclusion is not apparent or clear. And how can we say this? We can see this in our next illustration. Let me just go through that. And here we can see that in the lines that I colored straight is that we have a statement that murder is always morally wrong. And its conclusion is therefore abortion is morally wrong. Although it is wrong, of course. Those two things are both morally wrong, but it does not suffice to what its conclusion should be because the premises itself is shaky. Why is it shaky? Of course, because it does not go to the fact that it says like abortion. It just only says murder, and there's not even a suppressed evidence that this is really morally wrong, even though it's morally wrong, but it's not a logical factor at this point. And we go to our next example is that the test was hard because the questions were so difficult. So as we could hear, it's a different pattern from the first one, but it's ultimately just the same. This is because the arguments itself is not leading to a better conclusion. Like it's just going back and forth. It's not going to something because, as you could see, the questions were so difficult. It was questions that made the test hard. But if you do those questions were of course easy, so that would make the test easy. So this just goes to show that begging the question actually is just creating an illusion. It creates an illusion that you could have just said no, add this and that, but it actually isn't. It's just trying to confuse the respondent in some way. That's what begging the question actually is. As we move to the next slide. Okay, so the argument seems valid and on point. However, it does not support the conclusion of the statement. As you can see here in my final illustration, it is capital punishment is justified to crimes of murders and kidnappings due to it being legitimate and appropriate. This is just the first one is just a shaky premises going to a conclusion and a conclusion, then going back again. As you can see, there are no point of arguments and that have a reasonable support to the conclusion at this step because as you can see just because someone says capital punishment is justified for murder for those who murder and kidnap, it is not appropriate, it is not logical. So it's not a logical thing to do This is mainly because why would someone even do that in the first place? So it just actually shows that the arguer is just trying to create an illusion. It's just trying to use some rhetoric senses into trying to prove that it is on point, and it's trying to prove, yes, that this is correct. But no, it is actually not, and that's why it is so different from the rest. And so we move to the conclusions is that arguments that beg the question are normally valid. They're easy to see because they are these questions that are sounding very unusual, just as what just as my past or my previous examples. As you can see, those were very unusual and very not the typical questions that you would see in a day-to-day basis. An example for this was in the page that I read was that in the world we live in the world which we live displays an amazing degree of organizations. Obviously, this world was created by an intelligent God. So how would we even know that this world was even created by an intelligent God? Or how do we know that it is an amazing degree of organization at all? So see, it has no point of or no logical aspects of going to somewhere. So an opposite example for this is that when this fallacy is not in effect, such as a statement like no dogs are cats, therefore no cats are dogs. That is not an example of begging the question because it is truly on point in its own logical aspects and its conclusion. Its supporting point is connecting to the conclusion itself. So let us move on to the second fallacy. So complex question. What is complex question, by the way? So, complex question it occurs when an individual has completed two or more questions are being asked in the guise of a single question, and an answer is given to it both. This type of argument is intended to trap the respondent into acknowledging something an individual might not acknowledge, or otherwise the individual does not want to acknowledge this at all. Here is an demonstration of it. So here is as you can see, the first circle. It attempts to trap the respondent by asking the question. The respondent completes the argument. This is because the respondent is dull sometimes. It is dull in a way of being asked questions such as, "Have you stopped cheating on exams?" If you were to say yes, then you were cheating in the past. If you said, yes, I've stopped, so you stop now and you also did cheating in the past. So those are an example of complex questions. It is two questions and like one sentence. Another example for that is, where did you hide the marijuana you were just smoking? So if you say under the bed, it means you were just smoking. So it just proves that you're a smoker at you're a smoker and you hid it under the bed. So you question both of those already. So it didn't the question or the arguer doesn't need to ask you those two questions because you already asked gave him the answer beforehand. And another example to that is another illustration that I personally created was, when did you stop cheating on her? So if you said yes, then you cheated on your partner. But you would typically then reply on a date such as last week. So you stopped cheating last week, but you were cheating also in the past. So yes, you were answering like both questions, and you were like, and this also infects like, you're are you being loyal? So he's not being loyal because the person is already cheating. So if that makes a point, that will move further. So what isn't a complex question? So when it is a complex when it is a leading question, of course, it is not a complex question. They do not intend to trick the respondent into admitting something they do not want to answer. And also, to identify a complex question is it when an individual put an answers to a question that will trick them into providing the argument with an evidence about what they did. So just for those examples that I did, and I'd like to give an example what isn't a complex question or what is a leading question. So a leading question is like, tell us on April 9th, did you see the deceased person or did you shoot the deceased person? That is a leading question. It wants you to answer something that you don't even normally want to answer because you would try to normally defend that yourself. Those are leading questions and not complex questions because it does not intend to trick the person. Okay, it does not want to trick the person. Now we are going to move to the last one. And this last one is, I find it also very intriguing, and this is false dichotomy. False dichotomy. This is an amazing topic. It's actually also w- a thing that I would recommend people to understand or to read. Okay, so when an individual commits a disjunctive premises, two present two unlikely alternatives as if they were the only ones available, and the arguer then eliminates the undesirable alternative, leaving the desirable one as the conclusion. Oh, so how does this work exactly? Let's move on to the page that will illustrate this further. To illustrate that is here is a statement that will perfectly illustrate what I mean by false dichotomy. Is this either you buy only American made products or you don't deserve to be called a loyal American? Yesterday you bought a Toyota, it's therefore clear that you don't deserve to be a loyal American. So it just proves that it's just giving you alternatives that aren't even going to affect your life that much. So it's just trying to give you an alternative, but it's not actually the only alternative you want. It's just trying to give you a false sense of hope. Something like that. Like you could be like a loyal American if you just buy loyal, just products made by Americans. So it would give you a false sense in your head, like, wow, I would be a loyal American. But even though nobody would even care for that, like no one in this world would care about that. Let's move further. Is that false dichotomy lies in the illusion created by the arguer that the disjunctive premises presents jointly ex- exhaustive alternatives. If they did, the premises would be true of necessity. It is also otherwise called false bifurcation. Bifurcation. Okay, so that is its other name. So and the, or it's otherwise called either or fallacy. Either or fallacy. Okay, so as you can see in these fallacies of presumption, they only lead you to a test of like questioning yourself, questioning the value of a statement, but it isn't true sometimes. It's just leading you into something or somewhat to not be true. That's is the purpose of I don't know false presumption, and you can indicate it by just trying to understand the just trying to understand what those three were. So like begging the question, it tries to propose you a question that ultimately does not even get you to where you are or what point you're trying to make. And also in the complex question is I don't also understand, people will not get this directly because in the complex question it's just like forcing you into a type of questioning where yeah, in where you didn't want to answer in the first place, but you did answer it because you were tricked. You were tricked into answering something you didn't even want to answer. Also, in false dichotomy, if it creates an illusion where you think is the only two alternatives or the alternatives that they are trying to give you, but it actually isn't. There are more alternatives to what they are. It's just trying to be, it's just trying to give you something that you shouldn't normally try. Just for example, you bought an Android. That's disgusting. You should have bought an iPhone. Androids are so sucky. They are so useless. That is also an example of false dichotomy. Since Androids aren't really that useless, they're also similar to what an iPhone is, and they're all great in their own ways. So, those were the examples of the fallacies of presumption. I hope you learned something today, and I hope that this was very insightful for you. And if you need some any more questions about this, you could just tell me or give me a heads up because I can teach you all about this because the knowledge I gained from this was from our lovely teacher, Mom Lalot, and this was uh, an amazing. Hopefully this was a complete assignment or a great assignment to be called. So thank you and thank you for listening.